Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Education and Skills Service Transformation Committee on Wednesday, the 27th of September. Welcome to people online and in the room on what is I think it's the first storm of the season. Is it Storm Agnes or something? So hopefully we'll be able to finish at a reasonable time so people can get home safely. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any?
No, I haven't had any yet, Chair.
Okay, no one indicating online. The second point of the agenda is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. No one indicating. And the third point of the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. Can I, before we go into the minutes, just make a couple of little points about the workshop that we held last week on the 20th of the 9th on home to school transport. Extend my thanks to all the officers involved in education, legal and transport for what was a very full, structured and detailed workshop. It was quite intense, Kate, wasn't it? You know, there's a lot of information. And a huge amount of questions from committee members, which was fantastic, and the officers answered them brilliantly. And it was seemed clear to us, I think it's fair to say, that the options, the challenges are huge, but the options are being explored in great detail, and there's a need to be innovative as we continue to meet the statutory requirements, and also to use discretion in the interests of our children and young people across the city and county of Swansea, and is work in action as we, and the word is transformation, you know, that is the word, you know, but the challenges are being addressed head on, and that was wonderful and heartening to see, I think is fair to say. So thanks officers for that. It was really beneficial for committee members. So the third point on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. So can I ask you to have a look at page 1, page 2, and page 3 of the minutes. If you are content with them, then I would ask you if I'm allowed to sign them as a correct record of the meeting. Can I have a proposal and a seconder, please? Somebody to say. Lovely. Thank you, Lyndon.
Yes, seconder.
Yep, brilliant. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And then we move on to the fourth item on the agenda, which is supporting sufficient specialist places. Is that what we call alliteration in education? It might be, but I think I'm handing over to Helen or to Kate.
You want to introduce it, Helen, or do you want me to go straight to the report?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'll just say a couple of words by means of introduction. So this is very much part of our master plan, if you want to call it, in terms of supporting sufficient specialist places in Swansea. You will have heard of the proposal in Cabinet recently around the special school and the future of special schools in Swansea last week. But this is also part of that plan in terms of sufficient specialist places. It's a very ambitious plan, and it was born out of a peer review that was conducted by a North Wales authority in Swansea some time ago. And some of the outcomes and recommendations of that peer review were very clear, really, about our need to reset and redesign our specialist teaching facilities, of which there are 34 across our Swansea schools. So this is an ambitious plan. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen by next year, but it's also part of our transformation agenda in education. So the Transformation Board is looking really at tracking the progress of this ambitious programme, because there are several projects contained within it. But I think Kate is here today to tell you about the principles of this ambitious programme of activity, and indeed the outcomes we expect probably in about 5 years' time. So it's very much a positive journey of improvement, but it's not going to happen overnight.
That's excellent. Thank you, Helen. Kate?
Thanks. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll go through the report in the main and I'll draw out the key points from there for the committee.
Yes, please.
So obviously the first section around that is the background to this. So we know the purpose of this committee, and at the meeting on the 14th of June, it was agreed that this programme supporting sufficient specialist places would be a key area for consideration from the committee. And so this first report is to kind of set the context for the supporting sufficient specialist places programme and outline how the council can enhance the provision for children with additional learning needs, because what we want to do is to ensure that all of those who need additional or specialist support can access it within a truly inclusive system, and we want to make sure that we can also provide a local quality assured an equitable offer. And the aim, as Helen said, is to achieve this goal within 5 years, because there's a lot of work that we have to do, and it is an ambitious programme, but 5 years is a timescale that we've set for ourselves. So in terms of the current position, we're starting from a strong place. So the expectation is that all schools in Swansea are expected to provide learning environments where the needs of all children can be met wherever possible. And that's in line with legislation under ALNet 2018. We're mandated to do that, but we also know that we've got a moral responsibility to do that. In addition to that, as Helen has said, we've got 34 specialist teaching facilities that are housed within schools in Swansea, and they're hosted by those schools on behalf of the local authority, providing specialist education provision for children and young people who may need something in addition to the mainstream offer. And then we've also got 2 special schools currently who will offer a further level of specialism should that be required. In Swansea, our STF provision has been added to over a number of years, and that's because levels of need have increased or new areas of need have been identified. And what's happened historically is that STFs have been established where there's space in a school, or where there's a particular interest, somebody, a head teacher who's got a particular desire to offer this sort of provision. And that's been beneficial because we've had, a real kind of commitment, but it hasn't always been a strategic whole system approach. And so that means that sometimes we've got provision in places where we would not wanted, and we've got some gaps elsewhere. So we need to make sure that we can address that situation. So we've also got a variation in approach to inclusion across Swansea schools. We've got many examples of excellent practice. So we've got lots of really good work happening, and there's a huge amount of training, support and guidance for schools. So a lot of really good work and a lot of excellent practice. What we're struggling with, I suppose, is the resource or structure to offer a comprehensive programme of quality assurance. So what we want to do is maximise all of that really good practice and embed a quality assurance process so that we can keep a regular review and update of that to highlight and share best practice. Sometimes, because we haven't been able to do that, we've noted some inconsistencies, sometimes in referrals to SDFs. So that's something we think is important to develop and strengthen. We have got some issues with capacity. SDFs in Swansea are full, and because of when I explained the reason how we've developed SDFs over the years, we don't always have them in the locations that we would want to have them, which means that some children have to travel distances to access the provision that can meet their needs, and we're really committed to improving that position. We know we've got really good provision. What we want to do is to make sure we've got it in the places where we need it. We'd like all children and young people to be able to access the provision they need within their local communities, wherever that's possible. And we recognise that long journey times can have an impact on learner well-being. So, and we know as well that it's expensive. You referenced the committee, the workshop that we had last week. We know that those costs are increasing. And what we would like to do is to channel that money into education. We also know that needs are increasing across the spectrum of additional learning needs. So we've got increasing demands on mainstream schools, on our special schools and on specialist places. So we do have some waiting lists in some areas. We know the impact of the pandemic has meant a delay in learning for some children and young people, and there's a national increase in autism. So we recognise that the need is growing and the pressures are growing. So we've done quite a lot of work to date. We haven't been standing still. We've got lots in place to address this. So since 2020, we've undertaken an extensive period of review and redesign of the current provision. So we've got a real in-depth knowledge of what we want to achieve. There's been a high level of stakeholder engagement and collaboration and co-design. So we recognise this is not something we should be doing on our own. We've included a number of our stakeholders, including our parent carer forum, head teachers, additional learning needs coordinators from schools, local health board colleagues from child and family services, and officers from across different areas of the education directorate as well, not just from the ALN team. We've got a change team that's been established with the members of the education directorate senior leadership team. So to give this a kind of, real priority. And the collaboration period resulted in a set of principles which will underpin any new model of provision. And those principles are detailed in the appendix, so I won't go through them. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at them, but they'll give you the essence and the ethos then of that new provision. During the previous academic year, 22-23, we had 4 development groups who were working with officers from the ALN and inclusion team on transferring these aspirational principles into an operationally deliverable model. And the outcome of this work is a proposed model of provision that could be applied across all school clusters in Swansea. And that model of provision is currently being finalised and will be shared with the change team, who can consider its viability in terms of deliverability. And that's like a key next step for us. We do recognise that the new model may be more resource intensive than the current model, but we think that's important because it reflects the increasing demand, emerging needs of learners, and the shift in pressures in terms of society, and increased legal responsibilities of both schools and the local authority linked to the legislation to ALNet. We also know, though, that our preferred proposed model is likely to reduce transport costs and enhance local authority provision within the county, which should reduce the need for costly out-of-county options, which also necessitate learners being educated out of their local communities, which really goes against our kind of ethos and principles. So it's hoped that savings achieved in those areas could be redistributed to support the new model. There is a challenge because current budgetary constraints mean that that's more difficult, but we're really committed to finding solutions to that, and we want to enable our proposed model to succeed. We'd be grateful for some input and some insight from this committee, really, in how we might be able to progress those plans. I did want to touch on a couple of pilot schemes, because a lot of what we're talking about is a long time in the making, but to kind of give you some insight into what we're actually doing operationally that's making a difference at the moment. We've got 2 pilot projects running. So because of the scope and complexity of the work, and some of the thinking, which is quite transformational, we thought it was important to explore some of the emerging proposals with pilot projects in order to kind of test the new thinking, and to identify strengths and any challenges in those proposals. So that's led to 2 pilot projects, which is our minibus pilot and our Dylan Thomas cluster enhanced provision pilot. So if I talk about the minibus pilot first, we did touch on it in our workshop. It developed very much from the stakeholder workshops that we held. What we heard as an emerging theme from head teachers with larger SDFs was that the number of taxis transporting individual learners was having an impact on site safety and site management, but also had some wellbeing implications for learners, because they were having an extended start or end to their school day due to journey times. We had some concerns about equality of opportunity. So the usual opportunity for families is that they have a daily kind of, particularly in primary, daily informal contact at the school gate. And if you're coming to school in a taxi, that opportunity doesn't exist. We also know that there were some pressures around increasing fuel prices, limited number of taxi tenders, and short notice for placements, often meaning that we would be paying quite inflated costs for ALN home to school transport. So we undertook quite an extensive piece of work to make sure that we explored all kind of health and safety options, legalities. We looked at a lot of planning, and we implemented a small pilot, a minibus pilot, with 2 schools initially, and the pilot involved the schools using their own minibuses, staffed by school staff, to undertake the home to school transport arrangements for SDF pupils. We did start it really small scale because we wanted to make sure we got it right. And that pilot has run now for a term. It's into its second term, and we undertook an evaluation at the end of the first term, and we've identified some real benefits from that. So there's been a financial benefit. It has been a really small scale trial, and we haven't maximised the opportunities in terms of financials on that, but we have already made some savings on it, so that's been a positive. One of the biggest positives for us was the impact on learner wellbeing. So a really important consideration of the pilot was that long journeys have an impact on learners. What we found is that from the questionnaires that we've given to parents and to children, that the feedback is overwhelmingly positive, with children and families welcoming the contact with a member of staff from the school at the beginning and the end of the day. And schools have also reported that behaviour challenges have lessened, that children are arriving at school ready to learn, ready for the day, and also at the end of the day kind of having that opportunity to relax and decompress after a day, and then get home in a state that is appropriate, you know, following their education. So also site safety, the project has reduced congestion and parking issues at the schools, which is a bonus. You know, that's always difficult around school sites. So there are less vehicles needing to access the school site at the start or the end of the day. And while the pilot is currently very small, we recognise that there is the potential in the future to reduce the number of vehicles providing home to school transport, which will have an environmental impact. And as we hope to scale this up, if we were looking at potential for leasing or purchase, we would want to explore electric vehicles as part of that consideration. So that's something for the future. So given the success, we're keen to scale it up. The biggest challenge is resource, not just financial, actually people resource in central teams to undertake the work. So we're currently exploring options that we'll be able to share at a later date. And then if I just touch on the second pilot project, which is in earlier stages, so it's only started quite recently. But one of the themes from the development phase was that it was identified that some learners would benefit from a shorter term placement in a specialist provision. So it won't be appropriate for all learners, and it's not being offered as an alternative to SDFs. It's being offered as something additional to complement our provision. It was an option to explore for those who needed an additional step in the graduated response to meeting need. So we also recognised that there was potential for specialist staff to operate in more of an outreach model to support some learners in their current settings, and perhaps even more significantly, upskill staff across schools and learners with different needs, on the basis that ALN is everybody's business. So it's a whole school approach. So the combination of the approach of shorter term placement in a specialist setting, enabling specialist staff to take this and enabling specialist staff to take their skills and expertise out of the setting, and has led to a proposal for an in-reach outreach provision that would be offered on a locality basis, and it's being trialled at the moment at what we're calling a cluster enhanced provision within the Dylan Thomas cluster. So at very early stages, so it's not actually functioning at the moment, but we've done a lot of preparation work for it. The plans are in place, done a lot of documentation, and we're ready to start to take that forward. So it's been planned with all primary head teachers and Elenkos in the cluster, along with the Elenko from the secondary school. There are very clear parameters in place, and parental agreement is an absolutely critical element to any potential placement. That's fundamental to it. As I say, the plans are still at early stages. We're grant funding it at the moment, and we're developing some guidance documentation, and anticipated that the provision will be available to learners in the new calendar year, so January 24. It'll be very carefully reviewed and the effectiveness assessed to help inform future developments. There's been a high level of commitment from the cluster, and we can provide updates to this committee to ensure you're appraised of the progress, and then you can support us hopefully with shaping those future plans. So just really in terms of our next steps, so what we want to do next is draw together all of our kind of predictive data and finalise projections of the future provision requirements. We want to ensure that proposed model is sufficiently aligned to those predictions, but also to allow some flexibility and ensure a responsive model, which is less restricted than the current arrangement, so that we can adapt it as we need. And once our change team have agreed the proposed model will be necessary to share with all our relevant stakeholders and seek cabinet approval to proceed. So it'd be helpful to have views and comments from this committee prior to submission of a final report. And it'll also be necessary to identify funding to secure the long-term future of the model. So we know the challenges around the current financial situation. So that's the element that we will be exploring quite carefully as well. And then the appendix is there as well with the agreed principles. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Kate. Can I ask Councillor Robert Smith as the cabinet member? Robert, I know that you've got something urgent to deal with, and thank you very much for coming. I wanted to know if you had a few comments to make.
No, just to thank Kate for taking us through the report. I think it outlines the current thinking and where we're hoping to take this, and really look forward to receiving members' views. So you have an input now as this policy is evolving. And as we develop, because at the end of the day, this is an essential part of the way we meet the needs of all learners in Swansea. We're talking about a new special school, but the SDF facilities play an equally important part. And I think we need to make sure that all segments are in the right place.
Lovely. Thank you, Robert. Can I ask Councillor Yvonne Jardine, please?
Thanks, Chair. Kate, I was really just looking some clarification. The 4 development groups that we're starting, I know you have been over this before, but I was wondering, are we thinking of having those SDF in the local schools as opposed to having them scattered across Swansea?
Yeah.
That's how it is now. They're scattered across Swansea. Are we looking to bring them more back in-house?
Yeah, sure. So they're currently hosted in schools at the moment. So they are, our SDFs are already based in schools.
Yes.
But what we would aim to do is to come up with we've got a plan that we're finalising, and that will mean that we will have a much more equal spread of provision across Swansea. So the intention would be that wherever you lived in Swansea, you would have access to provision that would be able to meet a child's needs closer to home. Yeah. So we've talked. Right. We're talking about communities and locality rather than kind of catchment. But yeah, absolutely, we would want the provision to be available locally.
Okay. I just wasn't quite clear about that. So that's where the savings would come in on the transport and the other things you mentioned. Yes?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks. Thank
you, Yvonne. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Kate, thanks for the report. In regards to point 3.2 on progress to date, can you let us know exactly what is the working relationship like with you, with obviously other council departments and other agencies? Is there a good working relationship and information is fed through, so all the groups are sort of who's involved with the area of the support are actually all on board in what's going on? And secondly, following up from Yvonne's point regarding having the SDFs in clusters, I think parents would be very supportive if the council could look at this as well, especially when it comes as well with the transition, if they're based in comprehensives, because there is a big step normally with children leaving primary to go into comprehensive. But I think with the needs for the support for the children, and I know that obviously the schools in the clusters work very closely with the comps because they have regular meetings. But I think this would be seen as a very, very positive step by parents if the STFs were actually within the comprehensive clusters.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So in terms of relationships with other departments in the council, yeah, absolutely. We've had good support and commitment to help us develop the plans. So that's been helpful and I think critical as well, because what we're really trying to develop is our ethos of ALN being everybody's business, and it's, you know, investing in our most vulnerable children. It brings benefit to everybody. So yeah, we've had good support. And your second point about transition and kind of cluster-based approaches, again, yeah, that's very much what we're trying to develop. So what we would hope to see is facility for children to transfer to secondary school with their peers. We know that our STFs operate a good inclusion model where children may spend a good amount of their time in the mainstream, and that's appropriate. What we hope then is they develop those friendships, they're part of their local communities, and they're able to transfer to the same secondary school as their peers do, to maintain and retain those relationships. But we would also always defer to parental choice as well. That's an important consideration.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Kate. Okay, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Kate.
Councillor Lyndon Jones.
Great, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Kate, as always, for a really thorough report. I think local provision is important where possible. It's not always possible, but where it can be done, that's obviously good, and it reduces that transport cost. I'm pleased to hear about the minibus initiative, as we heard last week. That's obviously good news. The other thing I just which I think I raised last week was the using Dylan Thomas as an example, where the staff very often met the children at the school gates, and I think that was a great way of encouraging them to attend and welcome them, you know, giving them a good welcome when they arrived at school, and it increased encouraged an increased number of people attending school. So you know, that is something that needs to be encouraged. But thanks very much for the report.
Thank you, Lyndon. Councillor Fiona Gordon.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry to join so late, but I haven't read the report. I think it's really positive that you're looking to build that capacity in mainstream schools and to share the expertise from the specialist settings. You mentioned that the sort of the sign in, is that the word? The sign up from parents is going to be key, and I think you're absolutely right. I wondered. Sorry, my signal. How will this be implemented? You said there's a waiting list for specialist placements. Will it be done with new people coming through panel? Will it be considered at panel whether this is a long-term STF placement or a short-term intervention trial? You know, will it be considered at that point, be part of the pilot, or will it be with current students of the STF, considering whether, you know, they can sort of be, yeah, that part of that in-reach outreach pilot? I was just quite interested in how that's going to work.
Yeah, sure. So what we wanted to be quite clear about was that it wasn't being offered as an alternative to an STF. It's something additional to enhance opportunities and to enhance the provision offer across, in this case, across the Dylan Thomas cluster. So we wouldn't want it, for example, to become a waiting area for an STF placement. It's more about giving some additional specialist support to children who might benefit from that shorter term intervention. The way we want to address the issue about having some waiting lists in some areas for STF is by actually improving our STF distribution across Swansea, so that we can make sure that we can also offer every child who needs an STF place at the time when they need it. This is something that would be additional for those children who perhaps don't need a long-term placement but would really benefit from a short-term intervention, and those decisions would be made at a cluster level but supported by local authority officers, but the process via the ALN panel to be referred for an STF place would still exist. We're not looking to take that away at all. This is something additional that would enhance our overall provision offer, if that makes sense.
Okay, Fiona.
Thanks.
Lovely, thank you very much. Councillor Joy.
Hi, I just wondered, how much engagement you've had with the STF staff at the moment. My concern particularly is that, and I'm sure you've considered this, is that in effect you would water down the specialism by putting it in local environments rather than having them all, you know, a specialist autism, a specialist, you know, for different issues. And I just wondered how they would feel and how they're managing that.
Yeah, sure. So that's part of the co-design and collaboration process from the outset, really. We've had engagement from head teachers, Elenkos, and we've met with STF staff. We've been out to visit a number of STFs. We've been to the Elenco cluster lead meetings, and there are STF manager meetings which we go to, and we've had input workshops with them, and they've contributed to it. One thing that we're really keen to avoid doing is to watering anything down. This is about strengthening the specialist offer. That's exactly what it is. It's a specialist offer, but what we want to do is make it more accessible, I guess, and that's the thinking behind the inreach outreach, is that where we know we've got some really excellent experienced staff and activity in our STFs. At the moment, it's isolated, I guess, to that particular STF. What we want to do is to make sure that we've really got visibility on that and that we can support and promote that kind of good practice and help to upskill mainstream staff as well. But yeah, absolutely not watering it down. In fact, the opposite of that would be the aim.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Kate. Just a couple of points from me. Please continue to indicate if you want to speak. We've seen an increase in need, increase in the pupils on the autistic spectrum, and over time. And I know we discussed this in previous committee. You know, this challenge is significant. Do we see trends, and do we know why? And are they sort of concentrated in geographical areas? And I'm thinking in terms of those hot topics and hotspots, you know, that we saw when we looked at vulnerability data previously. You know, the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation perhaps being relevant, and those kind of challenges. So is it an unequal distribution of that increasing, evidence of autism?
Yeah, sure. So one of the challenges we've got is data collection. So that's something that we're really keen to work on. What we know at the moment is that, yes, in some of our more compact city areas, our areas of, you know, kind of higher residential instances, then obviously we see a higher level of ALN, but proportionately the need is the same across every area of Swansea. So we know every school in every area will have instances of children who need support for autism, for speech, language and communication, for moderate learning difficulties, and in the same proportion, albeit in smaller numbers, in our more rural areas. We are looking at that link between deprivation and additional learning needs. We know anecdotally that it exists, but what we really need to work on now is getting some really strong data together, and that's one of our next steps, really, is to look at those patterns and trends and look at our predictive data so that we can make sure that we're planning around that. And that's a key consideration. We're linking with colleagues across different areas, including health board and so on, to understand what that really looks like. And that's a piece of work that's happening at the moment.
Thank you, Kate. Helen?
Thank you, Chair. When we last had a data set to consider, this was about 3 years ago, and at that point in time, in the preceding 7 years, we saw a tripling in terms of autism across Swansea. So that was a stark statistic, you know, 3 years ago, and we suspect that the data gathering exercise that we intend to undertake will show a similar pattern of increase.
Thank you, Helen. It's incredible, isn't it? It really is. And my thoughts take me towards adverse childhood experiences, issues to do with alcohol, substance misuse, and these kinds of issues that all come into that melting pot that we've seen previously. But the increases, there must be reasons, and there must be trends, and there must be that statistical basis available from, as you say, a variety of different sources that we we saw that done so well, I think, previously in previous years, with all that data from different sources, not just education in the council, but elsewhere, local health board, and the police was Operation Encompass, was it? Or Operation Encompass, I think, as well. And it seemed that that data is layered and highlighting specific issues in the specific proportion of the children in our schools. Very interesting. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, you touched on speech and language there, and obviously, are we able to advise as to what pool of speech and language staff we have, or are we going to encourage schools to perhaps have the staff to perhaps take courses on speech and language to support? Because I think it's very important that we give the children the opportunity at the earliest opportunity, you know, especially if they have difficulties with speech and language, which might support them, you know, while they're going through their education, might help them not having to go to a special STF.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, again, you've identified something really that would be a key part of our strategy. So that earlier intervention, our specialist staff and our training programs are designed around supporting school staff to identify what may be needed. So, for example, we've got our specialist teachers, we've got social communication champions, and we've got colleagues in the health board who we're working with at the moment to review our SLA for speech and language support, so that we can make sure that that's accessible to all our schools wherever they need it, and they can ensure that children have access to that provision as early as possible.
Thank you, Kate. I can't see anyone else indicated at the moment. One other thing that struck me in this very positive report, I echo my colleagues' comments about that. This is really heartening to see the detail. And you've said consistently, Kate, this is the beginning. And as Helen said, this is a longer term focus. But we're looking at clusters, we're looking at communities, we're looking at the child and the parents central to the picture, surrounded by this network of professional support. And I think that is just really very encouraging indeed. You know, that it's like a web of support around, really, I feel, coming out of this. And it's a very targeted approach. I was a bit confused, but you give a great explanation about shorter provision being beneficial. You know, my mum wouldn't have said that when I was in school. It's just to make me go and say all day. Is that to do with, depending on the needs of the child, that some children might, you know, really be bright and sparkly for a few hours in the morning, but then fall off and really be less happy in the education environment, or vice versa?
Yeah, sure. And also, I think, you know, what really works for some children, not for all at all, but for some children, a shorter intervention, perhaps a period of a term or 2 terms with some very specialist support, can really give them a boost and really help them to make that progress, that little leap then that's needed. For other children, without a doubt, they might need a much more longer term provision. But what we want to do is build flexibility into the model as well, so that it's, you know, a graduated response is the right thing to offer, absolutely, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear journey. You know, we're all human beings and we do things at different paces and at, you know, at different times. And so it's building that flexibility and responsiveness to the child into the system, so that they can have a shorter term intervention if that's what's needed. At the moment, we haven't got that facility necessarily, or not as strong as we'd like it to be. So we want to, you know, maximise those opportunities.
Councillor Joy.
Sorry, can I ask a very pragmatic question on the minibus pilot that you're doing? I think it's a really good idea that it's the, you know, it's the children, it's the staff, and so on. The problem will be the conflict at the time that you need the minibus, and I'm sure this has been discussed, you know, on a very practical level between about 2:30 and 4:30. Your sports teams want it, your Duke of Edinburghs, you name it, want that minibus. School trips that have gone out in the day, and you're going to, in the nicest way, commandeer it for those children because they've got to get home. So and I do think it's a good idea, is there any provision where in the longer term you're thinking about purchasing a suite of minibuses maybe, or something along those lines?
Yeah, sure. No, exactly. And that was why we started it so small scale, really, because we recognised that was going to be a challenge. So in the pilot, we've been quite fortunate, I guess. The schools that we're working with have got more than one minibus, and we've also had offers from schools who weren't ready to be in the pilot, but were happy to have their minibus as a backup plan. Then obviously we've got to develop something sustainable, so what the pilot was really important around was establishing, does it work for children, does it work for families, does it work for the schools? Yes, we know it does. So longer term now, exactly what you've talked about, we've identified a little bit of grant money, so we are able to purchase 2 second-hand buses. That small scale, we're starting, so we've got to make a plan for that. We've got to think about how we can scale it up and how we can make it sustainable, because it does work. So the next bit of thinking is around how we address some of those issues which could become a barrier to its success, and we want it to be successful. So yes, you're right, that's what we're planning to do.
Thank you, Sandra. It's really very interesting to consider other possible offshoots and wider community use, and where this could go. That's quite exciting as well. Perhaps as we take these little steps and build up the pilots and the plans. I can't see anyone else indicating now. The last point of this for me was in the agreed principles on page 11. This is an approach to support all children across Swansea achieve aspirations. And I thought of my old friend and colleague, Barry Shears, who used to run a company called Vision 21 in Cardiff. And his focus was on people with significant learning difficulties and disabilities, and how you could get them into work, regardless of where they were. And it's real aspiration. So it doesn't matter who you are, then could you work as you move forward in your career? And how can we line you up for that career? It's meeting the needs of the individual. And I think there's a continuum here. This will set the foundation to move them forward through the education system, maybe then post-16, college, university perhaps, or into employment. And Vision 21, I remember they did some fantastic work there, and this just made me feel as positive as that organisation's work did. So that's great. Thank you very much indeed. So on that point, I think we can draw a line under the report. Kate, thank you very much indeed for that. That was really, really helpful and informative. And we move on to the next part on the agenda, which is item number 5. And that's our work plan. And our work plan tells us that our next meeting is on the 8th of November, where we'll be looking at right schools in right places. And then under that, we've got Wednesday, the 8th of November, 2023 at 4 p.m. for the next meeting. Can't see anybody else wishing to add anything in the room, online. And on that note, I would like to thank you all again for your attendance and your input. And I will close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good night.